Looks like we got some rain coming. Lord knows we need it. I didn't see you there. Well, since you're here, why don't you come sit a spit? I'm just rocking on the porch of my home, which was built in 1908. You know who else was around the turn of the 19th century? Paul Laurence Dunbar. I don't know whose dog that is.
Paul Laurence Dunbar, an essay by Madeline Cherish Redman. Because I have loved so deeply, because I have loved so long, God in His great compassion gave me the gift of song. Paul Laurence Dunbar, 1901. Paul Laurence Dunbar. Living here in Dayton, Ohio, I heard this name many times and knew it commanded respect. I also knew there was a high school named after him and wondered if its students knew his story. I decided to make it my personal mission to discover this man's rich lore. Paul Laurence Dunbar is one of the greatest writers of American history and in African American culture. He excelled as a poet as well as an Academy co-founder, arts collaborator, author, librettist, and social commentator. Paul overcame barriers, including racial discrimination and tuberculosis, to compose more than 400 poems in 13 books of poetry, 4 novels, 4 collections of short stories, articles in international publications, as well as lyrics for plays and musicals. And this was all in the span of a little more than a decade. Paul Laurence Dunbar was born on June 27, 1872, at 311 Howard Street in Dayton, Ohio. He was the son of Joshua Dunbar and Matilda Murphy Dunbar, former Kentucky slaves that had been emancipated. Matilda already had 2 sons from her former marriage, Robert and William Murphy, during slavery back in Kentucky. After her first husband passed away, she came to Dayton, Ohio, eventually marrying Joshua Dunbar, a man at least 20 years older than her. Former slaves rarely knew their exact age. Joshua escaped slavery in Kentucky during the American Civil War, and upon arriving in Massachusetts in 1863, became a soldier in the war's first 2 black units. After the war ended, Joshua moved to Dayton, Ohio, and worked at various manual labor jobs. He married Matilda on Christmas Eve in 1871, and 6 months later, Paul was born. Yes, 6 months. How scandalous. Joshua was happy to be a new father, and things went very well for a while, despite Paul's weak health. However, the marriage became troubled and violent. It was difficult for Joshua to find steady work due to racism as well as, in Matilda's words, his personal weaknesses. Despite earning some money, as well as receiving a small monthly military pension, Joshua's funds rarely went to taking care of his family. Matilda had to work tirelessly as a washerwoman to pay the bills. After finding out she was pregnant again, both parents were not happy with the news. They were stretched thin already, and some said that Joshua questioned the new baby's paternity. Matilda packed up her children and left Joshua. He then cut off all contact and financial support. Elizabeth Florence Dunbar, Lizzie, was born October 29, 1873. She was a sickly child, just like Paul. Matilda couldn't afford doctors, so she treated her daughter's ailments with salves and other homemade remedies she had learned from plantation slaves. Unfortunately, Lizzie passed away from dropsy, currently referred to as edema, at the young age of 2.5 years old. Paul remembered Lizzie fondly, even though he was not quite 4 years old when she passed. He wrote about her in his works. Paul's father later passed away in 1885, when he was just 13 years old. Paul's future works were heavily inspired by their stories of enslavement and plantation life. And unfortunately, the cycle of domestic violence continued years later within Paul's own marriage. Not long after moving to Dayton, Matilda attended night classes to learn to read, with the sole purpose of teaching her children. She taught Paul to read before he even started school, and he wrote his first poem at the age of 6. And had his first recital at the age of 9. Matilda recognized the potential in her son early in life and continued to make sacrifices of herself to nurture Paul's talents. Paul went on to Central High School, where he was the only student of color. He attended the school with Orville Wright, future aviation pioneer, and they became lifelong friends. He went on to publish the high school newspaper and then served as its editor-in-chief. He was also president of the school's literary society, was class poet, and a member of the debate team. By the age of 16, Paul had poems published in the Dayton Herald. Paul graduated from high school in 1890 at the top of his class. Though he was an outstanding student, he was unable to go to college to pursue law due to family finances. He begrudgingly got a job that was beneath him as an elevator operator. However, he was able to publish his first book, Oak and Ivy, at this time, and networked with his passengers. He gradually received numerous positive reviews and attracted many wealthy patrons to his work. One of those patrons offered to put him through law school, but Paul had let go of that dream already, and he was pursuing his writing full force. Through his poetry, he met and became close with Black leaders such as Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington.
You gotta stop scaring me. I don't know how old this shed is, but Dayton, Ohio is full of historic landmarks, such as my house that was built in 1908, around the time Paul Dunbar was moving and grooving.
In the late 1890s, Paul started working on novels and short stories as well. He was prolific during his short career, eventually publishing a dozen books of poetry, 4 books of short stories, 4 novels, lyrics for a musical, and a play. In 1895, Paul met Miss Alice Ruth Moore, a college graduate who was already an accomplished poet herself. She was most famous for her book, Violets, a collection of short stories. Paul was smitten. Oh, how love turns us all into a melted puddle of happiness. Paul was head over heels for Alice, as evidenced in an excerpt from his letter to her from London to New York on March 7th, 1897. You love me, Alice, you say. Ah, yes, but could you know the intensity with which I worship you? you would realize that your strongest feelings are weak beside. You gave me no time to think or to resist had I willed to do so. You took my heart captive at once. I yielded bravely, weak coward that I am, without a struggle, and how glad I am of my full surrender. I would rather be your captive than another woman's king. You have made life a new thing to me, a precious and sacred trust. They were married on March 6, 1898. They went on to make more books of poetry as companion pieces together. In October of 1897, Paul secured a prestigious job as a page at the Library of Congress. Though finally working in a stable and respectable position, he hated the job. The dust gave him coughing spasms, and his workstation was hot and stuffy. He felt trapped, like a caged bird. After urging from Alice, Paul left this job and returned to his true passion, writing. While in Washington, D.C., Paul attended Howard University after the publication of Lyrics of Lowly Life. Paul was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1900. During this time, this debilitating illness was often fatal. On the wise advice of his doctors, he moved to Colorado with Alice, as the cold, dry mountain air seemed to have a healing effect on many TB patients. Perhaps this would have worked had it not been for his doctor's second bit of not-so-wise advice. They recommended drinking whiskey to alleviate his symptoms. This led to a dependence on alcohol that turned him into a monster. In 1902, Alice separated from Paul after he nearly beat her to death. Alice rejected his every request to return to him, responding to his many letters only once, with the blunt, one-word telegram: no. Depression and alcoholism worsened Paul's already poor health, and he returned to Dayton, Ohio in 1904 to be with his mother. He died of tuberculosis on February 9, 1906, at the tragically young age of 33. Close friends said he had actually died of a broken heart. Alice found out about his death from a newspaper in Delaware, where she was working as a teacher. Paul was buried in the Woodland Cemetery in Dayton, next to his baby sister Lizzie. When Paul's mother passed away in 1934, she was buried near him as well. Their last home was turned into a national landmark, a museum open to the public. Paul became the first African American poet to earn national distinction and acceptance. He continues to influence other writers, lyricists, and composers to this very day, over 120 years later. Numerous schools and other places have been named in honor of Paul Laurence Dunbar, including high schools in Lexington, Kentucky, Dayton, Ohio, Baltimore, Maryland, Chicago, Illinois, and several others. Paul Laurence Dunbar was a talented but complicated man. Through his talents and hard work, he was able to touch the lives of millions throughout the generations. It was an honor to learn about his life.